In this video, I'm going to map out everything you need to know in order to choose the best device for you to make your remote schooling experience the best it can be. Hi, my name's Dave Copley. I'm a technology expert and a parent. And over the next few weeks, I'm bringing you a few technology top tips that are all aimed at helping you get the best possible experience out of remote school. This week, we're talking about a really tricky topic. We're talking about what's the best device for you specifically, based on the experience that you want for your kids, based on their age, based on the school that they go to. It's a really tricky topic. There's lots of things to consider. And it's funny, me and a few of my nerd friends we gathered together to talk about this a few weeks ago, and we were having this big debate about desktops and laptops and tablets and phones and Chromebooks and all of this stuff. And then one of my old friends sat very quietly through the whole debate and waited for us to finish talking. And he just said, "You're all idiots, right? Because the best device for remote schooling is the device that you already own." And that's such an important thing to remember, right? Because we can talk about what's the best device and whether you need to get one or not, and whether you can afford one or not is another issue, and we'll talk about that too. But the reality is, start with what you've got. But that notwithstanding, what I wanted to do was to break down all of the different decision criteria that you need to consider that will help you make sure that over time, you've got the right kind of technology to help your child get the best possible experience out of remote learning. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a really difficult conversation about money. This video is really hard to put together because there's so many choices that you have to make. Some of them require money and some of them don't. And I don't want to make any assumptions about what's affordable and what's not. I guarantee you I will do my absolute best to lay out a spectrum of offerings that range from the cheap through to the expensive. But then they also want to talk to what is perhaps the ugliest side of the situation that we're going through right now, and it's the concept of digital poverty. Because we know that many of you are at home with your kids without access to devices and without access to the funds to be able to equip your kids with devices. If that is you, if you're sat at home and you don't know what you're going to do and you don't know where you're going to get a device from, get in touch with us. Because what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to try and find a scheme that's in your area or that's applicable to you that will help you acquire the device that you need. Notwithstanding that, all of the advice I'm about to give you will still be relevant, whether you're buying at the high end, whether you're buying at the low end, or you're working through a scheme to get a device for you and your kids to access remote schooling. The point here is to choose the best technology that's most appropriate for your kids, for the level that they're at, where they're at in their school, and what the school is expecting them to do. That's why we're here. Now, in all of this, we'd love your advice too. Tell us about your experiences. Tell us right now in the comments below, tell me, what is your favorite device? What's the device that you've had the best experience with for remote schooling? We'd love to hear from you. Okay. So we've had the difficult conversation about money, and I'm glad that we've had that because we needed to get that out of the way. The second thing that we need to think about before we can start talking about the devices is there's a couple of sort of domains of variables that we need to consider. And the first is about your kids. And really specifically, it's the obvious things, really. It's about the age of your kids and where they are in their sort of academic career. So if your kids are young and they're at the beginning of school and they're maybe in Key Stage 1 primary, then actually their requirements for a device, and it's pretty obvious when you think about it, their requirements for a device is going to be pretty different to someone who is, in secondary, maybe approaching their GCSEs, Key Stage 3. So understand the age of your kids, that's going to be really helpful. Second, it's also good to have in the back of your mind the kind of learning style that you know your kids enjoy or respond well to. If you've got kids that are more creative, that's worth knowing, especially versus kids who are perhaps more scientific, more logical. And not to say that those two things are mutually exclusive, but it's just a style of approach that, again, will give you little cues about what device, what platform might work better for them. So that's the first kind of domain of variables that you need to consider. The second is really all about their school, or their schools if you've got, multiple kids going to different schools. And your schools are important because you want to get a sense from them how invested they are in technology. So for example, it would be good for you to know if your school is planning for the kids to continue to use technology, continue to use laptops, for example, in classes after the pandemic has finished, or we're getting back to whatever normal might become. Because that really says to you that, an investment I make today needs to last, for a few years, right? Versus I've just got to get through lockdown. And the second reason why you need to understand where your schools are in relation with technology is most schools make a technology choice. It's like, what's their predominant platform? And really it's a choice between Google and Microsoft. And look, this is nothing about religion, right? There's nothing about whether Google or Microsoft's better. What you'll find simply is that schools will say, our primary platform is Google Classroom, or our primary platform is Microsoft and Microsoft Teams. And not, again, that those two things are mutually exclusive. You can use both, but you'll find that the school will favor one over the other. And knowing which one that is, again, will help you decide the right kind of platform and the right kind of device for your kids. So look, on a piece of paper, just right now, if you can, make a quick note of the age of your kids, the kind of the learning styles that they have, and then I want you to think about whether the school's going to need you to use laptops going on, or is going to invest in technology or not going forward, and what platform they are. Write those down. Fantastic. Now we can move on to the next level. So this next bit's going to be a bit tricky, right? Because what I want to do is I want to map out all of the different devices and just give you a quick sense of the pros and cons for each. And again, this is not to say one's the best and the other is the worst. It's really going to depend on you, your situation, the age of your kid, and all that sort of stuff. So let's start with the easy things. Let's look at desktops. Now, desktops for me are fantastic, right? The bit I love about desktops is out of all of the devices you could use, the sort of the price performance ratio, so that's how much power you get, but how much you spend, is the best of all of them, right? So you don't have to spend a lot on a desktop to get a lot of power. The problems with desktop, of course, is they're not very portable. More specifically, at home, you need kind of a dedicated place where they're going to live. And so that might be a problem for you. And second, of course, you can't take your desktop into school. Once the kids are going back to school, that's part of a challenge. So that brings us to laptops. Now, laptops are wonderful. We've had laptops for a long time, and laptops are probably the most portable and the most powerful of all of the choices that we have. They're a little bit more expensive. The problem that traditional laptops have, I would argue, is really more about battery life. And again, if you're a grown-up in the world of work and you use a laptop every day, you'll know that you don't go more than an hour or two without having to plug in. And again, if you're thinking about your kids and their experience back at school, that's going to be a challenge. The third area is Chromebooks, and they're kind of in between, for me at least, they're in between tablets and sort of true sort of full-blooded laptops. Chromebooks are amazing because they're small, they're light, they're powerful, they have brilliant battery life, but they run a Chrome operating system, and that's not a problem. It just means to say that you might not have access to all of the apps that you need. If your school's a Google Classroom school, then that's less of an issue. So Chromebooks, ultra portable, great battery life, and again, where you are on sort of how much you spend on them will dictate on how powerful they are. So again, another great choice. So number 4 is about tablets. Now, the beauty of tablets for me, yes, they're ultra portable and all that sort of stuff, but actually the joy of tablets is really all about the touch interface. And for younger kids in particular, that sort of touch interface is a really easy way for them to get into technology. So I love tablets for that. And then, again, the challenge that you really face with tablets if you're getting into sort of the older ages of kids is you'll start to sort of feel that you need a bit more power. You'll start to feel maybe you need some more traditional apps rather than the ones that come from the Play Store or from the App Store if you're using an iPad. And also the lack of a keyboard and mouse. So again, as your kids start to do more with technology, and certainly as they get older, they're going to need more than sort of the touch keyboard that you see on the screen. All of those problems are solvable, by the way. So there's no big deal if you can't do that. So then the next device is the phone. And again, look, I know that some of you, that's the only device you have, and phones are really brilliant. The fact that we've even got this device today that enables us to access the class is great, ultra portable and convenient and all those sorts of things. The challenge with the phone really is going to be about the screen size. And really, as a last resort, it's great. As an only resort, it's the best, that you can do. And I really understand that. And that's why I want to connect you. If it is the only device that you can afford and it is the only device that your kids have access to, let's see what we can do. So don't forget, contact me and I will try and help to connect you with people that can supply you with devices. Then I want to talk to you about 2 wildcards, right? These are the first sort of wildcard is the devices you have in your home that you could use for remote schooling that you don't know that you've got. And the best example would be if you've got a games console. So in particular, if you've got a PlayStation or an Xbox, both of those consoles have an internet browser. So there's no reason why you couldn't actually connect to remote school using those devices, using your TV as a monitor. So a great solution. It's not ideal, but certainly for those things where you're more looking to sort of watch the class rather than necessarily work in the class, it's a great option. And certainly for those of you who are struggling, maybe you've only got one device to share between a few kids, Again, it's another way of maybe giving another bit of access to people that don't already have it. And then the final wild card is this wonderful device. It's the Raspberry Pi 400. And, you know, Raspberry Pis are super cheap computers. They've just released this fabulous new computer for all of about 60 quid. And it's basically, there's a Raspberry Pi built into the keyboard. You can connect it to 2 monitors. For about 250 quid, you can build a dual screen PC, and that includes the monitors. Now, the problem with this is it's actually a bit technical to set up, and I would argue if you're the kind of person that would be able to set one of these up, you don't need me to tell you that this is a good device for you, right? You kind of already know. So I just wanted to mention it because it's a cheap option and it's there. So look, there's a spectrum of devices. We've gone through desktops, laptops, Chromebooks, tablets, phones, consoles, and other sort of browser-based devices, and the Raspberry Pi. That's the spectrum of choice that you're going to have. Now let's look at some really specific issues to help you get to that final bit where you can choose the device that's right for you. Okay, so we're moving into the kind of the quick fire round, okay? And I'm gonna just throw out a few issues that I want you to consider as we go forward. The first is this: desktop versus laptop. Now, look, I will declare openly my love for desktop. It was a device that I'd kind of not really used for years because, like many of you, I lived on a laptop and I lived wherever my desk was. I would be working on the train on the way into work, whatever it might be. That's not my world anymore. My world is I sit at my desk all the time and I use one device. It's my desktop and I love it. I love my desktop. The pandemic has rekindled my love of the desktop as a platform because, number one, it's more powerful. Number two, it's cheaper. Number three, it lasts longer. My desktop will last me probably twice as long than a normal laptop will. Simply because it's big, you've got lots of space, you can fix it. You can easily fix it. Even you, mum, you can fix your own PC. I'm telling you, it's great. Laptops are not like that. However, I also deeply love laptops because actually they will be the future for your kids. If you're going to go to a school where the school says, do you know what, actually we quite like the kids to use devices in classes going forward, then actually for all of my love of desktops, you should be thinking about a laptop. Laptops are wonderful, they're portable, they may struggle a bit with battery life, but they give you the full power of a full computer in a portable sort of solution. So again, there's the balance between those two, and it really hinges about where your school's going to be going forward with its relationship with technology. So here's another great quickfire question: traditional computer versus tablet or phone. Now again, this is pretty interesting, right? Now I grew up with traditional computers, so I'm a bit biased, right? I love full fat computers. I love the things that you can do, the flexibility that they offer you. My son, for example, has not grown up with traditional computers. He's grown up with phones and tablets. And he, loves the sort of the portability, the ease of use, and all that sort of stuff. Now, the thing for me is really, again, it's thinking about the age of your kids are at and the choices that you might have. So traditional computers for me are much better later in education. So as you get into secondary school and key stage 3, because they're just more flexible. They give you more choices. There's more software available to you. You have more control over the interface. So that will give you a better reward. In the early years, however, it's completely the opposite. I would argue that tablets and phones are probably the easiest way for younger kids to start to get into their use of technology. So, for me, it's a really difficult choice. The ideal, obviously, is not an either or, it's both. And look, I get the difficulty of that. And I know that we're in a world where not everybody can afford a single device, never mind two. But that's how I would play it out. So tablets and phones for younger kids, traditional computers for older kids as they go later on in education. So here's another classic one: Chromebooks versus Windows laptops. Now look, let's not get all religious about this because that's a really silly place for us to be. Chromebooks are absolutely amazing. What Google did with building that platform out was to try and streamline a portable computer. They're quicker, they're lighter, they have better battery life, but they run an OS which is restricted to Google's Play Store. So you're running essentially a cut down computer. Now that's not to diss it, right? Because these are powerful machines. You can run all day on them without charging. They can access all of the things like in Microsoft Office. All that stuff is available on your Chromebook, but they're not the same as a traditional Windows laptop. This is the bit, remember earlier where I said to you, what's the primary technology platform at your school? This is the bit that will really help you decide whether a Chromebook's right for you or a Windows laptop. Because if you're using Google Classroom, even though you can use a Chromebook in a school that's using Teams and you can use a Windows laptop in a school that's using Google Classroom, the reality is, if they're using Google, choosing the Google platform will just make your life a little bit easier. Things are designed to work together. Similarly, if you're using Teams, a traditional Windows laptop probably might be a better choice. Again, not that you can't use the other, but it will just be a little bit easier, a little bit slicker for you to use. They're both great choices. They both have their pros and cons. They both have their price points too. So you'll probably get more power for your money with a Chromebook, but you'll lose perhaps some of the choices that you might have in terms of things like apps that might be relevant to the learning that you're doing. Both great devices. You can't lose with either of them. Think about where your school's at. So this next one brings us back to the topic of money, and it's the debate about, do you get a new device or do you get a second-hand device? And for me, it kind of depends on the device that you want to go for. So for example, I would not give a second thought to getting a second-hand desktop computer. I really wouldn't. If I could get a second-hand one that's refurbished ideally, because then you get the warranty as well, in a heartbeat, I would absolutely do it. You'll get more bang for your buck. You'll get a device that's easy to fix, so the risk of it being a problem, is reduced. And again, you can, I was looking earlier today, for about 150 quid, you can buy a really good high-end desktop computer. You've got to add a monitor to that, so let's add another 75 quid to that. So 225 quid, I've got a really nice spec machine that's great, a platform for learning. Now that's desktops. If you're thinking about a second-hand laptop or tablet or phone, that's okay too, but just understand those devices are a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult to work on, so that might present a risk. If it's coming through to you through some scheme, or it's coming to you through some authorized reseller, then actually you're managing that risk because you'll have a warranty, you'll have somewhere to take it back. But for me, I'd be more confident about a second-hand desktop than I would a second-hand laptop, tablet or phone. There you go. So one of the things that we've talked about, but not really gone into detail on, is interfaces. And I mean specifically human computer interfaces. So this is about touch versus keyboards and mice. Now again, this really is dictated by the age of your kids, I would argue. So younger kids are going to feel a lot more comfortable with a touch device. It's going to be a lot more accessible to them, and they'll get a lot more out of that in the early years. As they get older, I would really recommend, even if you're still doing it on a phone or a tablet, start to introduce them to a keyboard and a mouse. Now you can buy cheap Bluetooth keyboards that will connect to tablets. You can buy even pointing devices or styluses that will work with those tablets as well. As they get older, keyboards and mice start to come into their own. They start to accelerate your ability to interact with the computer. I would also argue, and I know this is a bit controversial for some people, but your ability to type is going to be one of your key skills. One of your superpowers for the future is how well you can type. And that's not to say we're never going to write things down, and it's not to say that handwriting is dead. It's just to say that we're going to spend a lot of time, whatever we choose to do, whatever career your kids choose for their future, I guarantee you they're going to be using a computer and they're going to be using a keyboard in order to power it. So the earlier, the sooner that we can get them to be confident and happy learning to type, the better it's going to be. So for me, the difference between touch, keyboards and mice is really simply, it's one of age, touch for the early years, keyboards and mice as they progress and they get deeper into their education. Now, one of the discussions we've been having a lot recently is about the concept of write-on devices. Now, when I say write-on, I don't mean write-on, I mean write-on as in I'm writing on a device. Just as I would put pen to paper, I put stylus to the glass. And it might be a tablet or it might be a laptop like a Microsoft Surface or a Chromebook, but it gives the kids the ability to interact directly with what would traditionally have been on paper. And the reason why this is important, there's probably a number of reasons. The first is it gets rid of that, probably one of the biggest challenges we face in remote schooling, and this is the one that, is a nightmare. The teachers send us the classwork, we have to print the classwork out at home, the kids do the classwork on a piece of paper at the kitchen table or wherever, they write their answers. We've then got the challenge of how do we get this back into digital format so we can get it back into school, and maybe we scan it, maybe we take a photo with it, a nightmare. This just means that the teacher can submit the classwork to the kids grab their device, they pick up the stylus and they're writing on the device as if they were writing pen to paper. It means they can submit the classwork, it goes straight to the teacher, they can mark it, no printing, no scanning, no nightmare, happy days. The second area where these devices are really, really helpful is in the sciences, and in particular in sort of Key Stage 3 in sort of secondary school. And this is, if you imagine in the sciences, your kids have to write a lot of formulas. And once you can do that on traditional apps like a word processor, it's actually a lot easier and quicker for the kids to be able to write it using a pen or a stylus. You know, imagine, let's pick on lovely old Pythagoras theorem, right? So I've got to write a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm there and I'm on the keyboard, I got A, then I've got to figure out how do I do a superscript 2 and find the plus sign and the, you know, nightmare. I can just write it more quickly. So, you know, styluses right on devices are really helpful. The third area, and you might hate me for this, but if your kid's really artistic, the digital canvas is amazing. You know, if you've got a nice stylus and you've got a screen that you can draw on, you've got access to kind of artistic tools that the real world doesn't give you. Not as a replacement for traditional, you know, sort of expressions of our creativity, but a new avenue for people to explore. So those three reasons make write-on devices really, really good for use in remote schooling. The problem is, of course, the devices that have this capability typically are the more expensive devices. These are the ones that are at the higher end of the price range because you have to buy the pen and it's a bit more complicated technology. So it doesn't mean that they're suitable for everyone. If you can get them, they're great. If you can't get them, there are other ways that we can get handwriting into computers, other ways that your kids can write on their classwork that are a lot more cost effective. So it doesn't mean to be the only way you can do it, but they are great devices if you can afford to go in that direction. And I would really look at it if you're doing lots of formulas, if you're trying to minimize the printing, or actually you want to express your creativity. Okay, now I was going to say, so I've taken you on a whistle-stop tour of all of the devices that you need to think about and the choices and the parameters. Wasn't much of a whistle-stop, was it? There's a lot for you to think about. So I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to make some really generic recommendations. Now, clearly your mileage will vary. You know your kids better, and also you know what devices you have or haven't got access to do. And not for a minute am I saying that any of these are better than other choices, or that you won't be able to do remote schooling if you don't have access to them. I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to give you an idea. And it really comes down to the age of your kids. So if you've got younger kids, if you've got Key Stage 1 kids, so at the beginning of primary education, absolutely, hands down, tablet or a phone, specifically a tablet, is the best way to start. The touch interface makes all of the difference. It makes it accessible, it makes it engaging. Your kids intuitively know what to do with that device. As they start to get a bit older and we move into Key Stage 2, sort of towards the end of primary, the beginning of secondary, I'd certainly look at the very least to add a keyboard to that tablet. But more specifically, if I was thinking about a device for them right now, I'd be thinking about a low-end laptop or a low to mid-range Chromebook. So this would be a more traditional laptop style approach. A screen and a keyboard starts to bring them into that world of technology and computing, and it starts to open up the options and parameters of the things that they can do. If you're in Key Stage 3, so if you're in sort of secondary school, coming towards your GCSEs or maybe beyond, absolutely, I would be looking at either a mid to high-end laptop or Chromebook, or even a desktop. Now, the desktop's slightly controversial because, again, if you're going to a school where you're going to need to be taking a laptop into school when we go back to school, you may not want to buy a desktop and a laptop. So in that case, I would buy a good laptop, something that's going to be able to support their learning, maybe as a bit of extra power, because it won't just be browsing the web. It won't just be, you know, clicking on things on an educational website. It might be doing, you know, more intuitive things or more sort of powerful things that you need the processing power of the computer to do. The other thing I'd like to consider, and God, look, I know this is difficult, right? Because I'm talking about an expense here, but the other great solution might be a desktop and a low-end Chromebook. So you've got the portability for lessons, and really in lessons you should be just taking notes and that kind of thing. But then you come back when you're doing the real work, the research and the homework and that, you've got the power of a desktop. I get the complications, but don't forget desktops are probably the cheapest in terms of price performance out of all of the devices that we've talked about. So look, there, I've called it, right? So younger age kids, it's about the touch device and it's about the tablet. Mid sort of education kids, so end of primary, beginning of secondary, low to mid-range Chromebook or laptop. And then as we get later into education, Key Stage 3 and beyond, I would really be thinking about a high-end laptop or a good desktop supported by a tablet or something that I could take easily and conveniently into lessons. That's my choices based on my experience. I'd love to hear yours. Tell me what's the best device that you've got. Tell me right now in the comments the best device or the device that you've had most success with when it comes to remote schooling your kids. We'd love to hear from you. So look, I hope you found that helpful. I wanted to give you a sense of the kind of considerations that you needed to make when choosing a device for your kids for a remote school. I wanted to lay out the spectrum of choice that you have in kind of the different terms of device. I wanted to guide you through some of the key decisions, laptop versus desktop, touch versus keyboard, all those things. And I've even gone out on a limb to make some recommendations. Now, remember some caveats that we started with. Number one, there is no best device, right? The best device is the one that you already own. And so whether you have these or you don't, it's not the end of the world. We can still work. We can still make technology provide you with a great remote schooling experience. Number two, when it comes to budget, if you are out there and you are struggling to afford a device to help your kids get through remote schooling, then reach out. We will do our best to find a scheme that's operating in your area that's set up, because there are lots around now to make sure that you get a device if you're struggling to afford one. It's really important that you do. Number three, look, we'd love to hear from you, right? Hear your experience, your feedback on the things that have worked well for you, the devices that work well for you, and the scenarios that they work well in. That would be fantastic to be part of that conversation. So thanks again for joining us. My name's Dave Coplin. I'm going to be back again with some more technology top tips for remote schooling. You know the drill. If you've enjoyed this, give us a like. If you don't, give us some feedback. We'll make it better. Subscribe if you haven't done already. We'd love to see you again. We'll be back again next week.